Welcome to Unshakable Belief. I'm Monica Azoulay, and I'm so glad you're here. Wherever you're joining me from today, I want to invite you to slow down for just a little while. Take a breath, set aside the distractions, give yourself permission to simply be present. Because for the next few minutes, nothing else is asking for your attention. This is your time. I believe every house has different rooms, and every room serves a different purpose. Some rooms are where we celebrate. Some are where we work. Some are where we gather around the table and share meals. And then there are rooms where the conversations become a little quieter, a little more honest. The rooms where we finally feel safe enough to tell the truth. That's what unshakable belief is for me. It's a place where we investigate the stories, beliefs, and behaviors that have shaped who we've become, not with judgment, but with curiosity, because behavior leaves clues. Every reaction, every habit, every fear, every relationship, every success, every struggle, they're all telling a story. And when we become curious enough to investigate that story, we often discover that what we've been trying to fix isn't actually the problem. The behavior is simply pointing us towards something deeper. My hope is that every time you come into this room, you'll leave with one new understanding, one question worth carrying, one simple practice to try, and the reminder that no matter where your journey is taking you, your story isn't over. I'm so grateful you chose to spend this time with me. So welcome. Come on in. Let's begin today's investigation. Last week, we ended our conversation with one question. What are you carrying today that your creator never asked you to own? I thought about that question a lot this week, maybe because I know what it's like to recognize that something isn't mine, and I still refuse to put it down. Have you ever noticed how strange that is? We pray for clarity, we ask for wisdom, we finally recognize the unhealthy pattern. We even admit that it's exhausting, and then we keep doing it anyway. It's almost confusing. You would think that awareness would automatically create change. You'd think that once we recognize the burden wasn't ours, we'd simply lay it down and walk away. But that's rarely how healing works. In fact, I think one of the most frustrating moments in personal growth happens right there. It's the moment when your mind understands something, but your nervous system hasn't caught up yet. You don't, you don't have to fix everyone. You know someone else's choices aren't your responsibility. You know you can't control every outcome. You know. But yet, your hand reaches for the burden almost automatically. Why is that? For a long time, I thought the answer was that I wasn't. For a long time, I thought the answer was that I just wasn't trying hard enough. Maybe I wasn't praying enough. Maybe I hadn't forgiven enough. Maybe I still had more healing to do. Maybe I simply lacked faith. But the more I investigated my own behaviors, the more I realized I was asking the wrong questions. The question isn't, why can't I let go? The better question is, what am I afraid will happen if I do? Those are very different questions. The first assumes that there's something wrong with you. The second assumes there's something you're trying to protect. And that's exactly what survival strategies do. They protect us. Not because they're always healthy, but at one point they made sense. Think about it for a moment. No one wakes up one morning and decides, you know what? I think I'll spend the rest of my life carrying responsibility for everyone around me. No, the pattern develops quietly over years. Usually because somewhere along the way, your brain connected carrying with safety. Maybe you learned that if you stayed responsible, there would be less conflict. Maybe you learned that if you anticipated everyone's needs, you could prevent disappointment. Maybe you learned that if you kept everyone happy, life stayed calmer. Or maybe you simply learned that there wasn't anyone else coming to carry the weight. So you did. Children are incredibly adaptable. It's one of the most beautiful things about them. It's also one of the reasons so many adults spend years trying to unlearn what once helped them survive. Children don't ask, is this emotionally healthy? They ask, what do I need to do to be safe? And then they become incredibly good at doing it. That's why I don't believe healing begins with criticism. I don't think healing begins with trying harder. I don't even think healing begins with behavior change. I think it begins with compassion. Compassion for the younger version of you who figured out the best way they knew to survive. The little girl who believed she had to become responsible before she was ready. The little boy who learned it was safer not to cry. The teenager who decided staying invisible was the best way to avoid rejection. None of those children were broken. They were brilliant. They adapted. The problem is that adaptations are designed for survival, not necessarily for freedom. And sometimes the very thing that protected us then prevents us from fully living now. That's why letting go feels so frightening. Your mind may understand that you're safe, while another part of you is still whispering, but what if you're wrong? What if everything falls apart? What if someone gets hurt? What if this time it's your fault? We know they're not logical questions, they're survival questions. And until we understand them, we keep confusing fear with responsibility. We'll keep mistaking anxiety for wisdom. We'll keep believing that if we're still holding on, it must be because we're supposed to. But what if it's not true? What if you're not still carrying the burden because it's yours? What if you're carrying it because your nervous system hasn't yet learned that it's safe to put it down? I think that's where today's investigation begins. Not with forgiveness, not with surrender, not even with trust. Those will all come. Today begins with something much simpler. Today begins by asking, what is my fear trying to protect? I want to invite you to do something with me for just a moment. Think about the last time you found yourself replaying a conversation in your head. Maybe someone misunderstood your intentions. Maybe someone made a decision you desperately wanted to change. Maybe someone you love is struggling and every part of you wants to rescue them. Or maybe you're carrying guilt over something that happened years ago. Now ask yourself something different. Not, why can't I let this go? But what does letting go feel like it will cost me? Sit with that for a minute. I don't think most of us are holding on to pain because we enjoy suffering. I think we're holding on because somewhere deep inside, we've attached meaning to the burden. Maybe letting go feels irresponsible. Maybe it feels like giving up or being disloyal. Maybe it feels like if you stop worrying, you'll stop loving. Or maybe it feels like if you stop carrying the weight, someone else is going to get hurt. Now, these aren't usually conscious thoughts. Most of the time, they're so automatic we don't even realize that they're running in the background. They're simply the rules our nervous system learned a long time ago. One of the biggest shifts in my own healing came when I stopped assuming my nervous system was fighting against me. Instead, I began seeing it as trying to protect me. It's a completely different perspective. Your nervous system is not asking, what would make Monica happy? It's asking, what has kept Monica alive before? Those are very different questions. Your nervous system doesn't necessarily recognize truth. It recognizes familiarity. If chaos was familiar, calm can feel uncomfortable. If carrying everyone's emotions was familiar, healthy boundaries can feel selfish. If constantly preparing for the worst was familiar, peace can feel unsafe. Think about it. Sometimes the very things we've been praying for feel uncomfortable when they arrive. Not because it's wrong, but because it's unfamiliar. That realization helped me stop judging myself. For years, I thought something was wrong with me because I kept returning to the same patterns. Now I understand something very different. My brain wasn't trying to sabotage me. It was trying to protect me, but it was using an old map. The problem wasn't that the map was bad, it was outdated. Have you ever used the GPS on your phone and realized halfway through the drive that the road had changed? The GPS wasn't trying to mislead you, it was simply operating from old information. I think our survival strategies work the same way. They're trying to navigate today's life with yesterday's map. No wonder we end up exhausted. No wonder we keep taking roads that no longer lead to where we want to go. No wonder awareness alone doesn't immediately change our behavior, because understanding the destination isn't enough. We have to update the map. That's where investigations become so powerful. Investigations don't shame the old map. They simply ask, is this still true? Is this still necessary? Does this belief still belong in my life? Those questions can change everything. When I realized that many of the beliefs guiding my decisions had never actually been examined, they had simply been inherited or absorbed or concluded by a younger version of me who was doing her very best to survive. The younger me believed that she had to anticipate everyone's needs, had to earn safety, believed that I had to carry responsibility long before it was appropriate for my age. And I want to pause here for a moment because I think this is incredibly important. You don't look back at that with frustration. I look back with gratitude. The younger me, she kept going. She developed remarkable strengths. She learned resilience and perseverance and responsibility. Those weren't failures. Those were gifts born out of difficult circumstances. But gifts given for one season aren't always meant to define the next. There comes a point where survival quietly asks to become something else. Not because survival was wrong, but because you've outgrown it. The strategies that carried you through one chapter may not be the strategies that carry you into the next one. That's where healing begins to feel less like losing part of yourself and more like honoring who you were while making room for who you're becoming. I think it's one of the gentlest invitations that the reset methodology offers. It doesn't ask you to reject the person you've been. It invites you to understand her, to thank her, to recognize why she believed holding on was necessary. And then, with compassion, to ask whether she's finally safe enough to open her hands. Because here's what I'm discovering. We don't let go because someone tells us to. We let go when the truth finally becomes safer than the protection we've been clinging to. I think that's where our investigation takes us next. Not simply into letting go, but into understanding what forgiveness was always meant to be. As we've been talking today, you may have noticed something. We haven't actually talked very much about forgiveness, and that was intentional, because I don't think forgiveness is where the journey begins. I think understanding comes first. Compassion comes next. Safety begins to grow, and then forgiveness becomes possible. For years, I thought forgiveness meant pretending something didn't matter. I thought it meant minimizing the pain, moving on quickly, being the bigger person, acting as though everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. If I'm honest, I don't think I resisted forgiveness because I wanted to stay angry. I resisted forgiveness because I misunderstood what forgiveness was asking of me. Maybe you felt that too. Maybe you've heard someone say, you just need to forgive, as if it were a switch you could flip, as if years of hurt could disappear because someone gave you good advice. That's never been my experience. Because if forgiveness feels like saying what happened was okay, then of course your heart resists, and it should. Some things are not okay. Some words should never have been spoken. Some betrayals should never have happened. And some wounds change the course of our lives. Forgiveness is not pretending those things don't matter. It's not rewriting history. It's not removing the accountability, and it's definitely not placing yourself back into unsafe situations. It isn't pretending that trust has automatically been restored. Forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. Trust is rebuilt through consistent behavior. Forgiveness is something entirely different. The more I investigated my own story, the more I realized I wasn't actually holding on to anger. I was holding on to the illusion that if I kept replaying the story, I could somehow change the ending. If I thought about it long enough, maybe it would finally make sense. If I replayed the conversation one more time, maybe I'd find the words I should have said. If I carried the hurt long enough, maybe it would somehow protect me from ever experiencing it again. But that's what pain often whispers to us. Don't let go. If you let go, you'll forget. If you let go, they'll win. If you let go, it can happen again. Those are powerful lies because they convince us that carrying the pain is somehow keeping us safe. But is it? Or is it simply keeping us connected to a chapter we've already lived? One of the greatest gifts of investigation is that it helps us separate what happened from what we began believing because of what happened. Those aren't the same thing. The events happened once. The story often gets repeated for years, sometimes decades. I know that was true in my own life. There were things that happened I could never change. But the story I told myself, that story could change. When it changed, everything else began changing with it. That's why I don't think forgiveness is about the past. I think forgiveness is about the future. It's deciding that yesterday no longer gets to write tomorrow. It's refusing to let pain become your permanent identity. It's choosing not to build your future around what someone else chose to do. It doesn't mean you forget. It doesn't mean the memories disappear, and it doesn't mean the consequences magically vanish. It means the pain no longer gets the final word. I think that's why forgiveness feels so connected to freedom. Not because the past changes, but because you do. You're no longer making today's decisions from yesterday's wounds. You're making them from today's truth. That's a completely different way of living. When I look back over my own journey, I don't think forgiveness happened all at once. It happened one choice at a time, one truth at a time. One moment where I chose to stop asking, why did this happen to me? And I started asking, who do I want to become because this happened? Because my attention wasn't fixed on the person who hurt me. It was focused on the person it was becoming. And that is where real freedom begins. Not when the past disappears, but when it no longer has permission to define your future. As we bring today's investigation to a close, I want to leave you with one final thought. Healing doesn't ask you to become someone else. It invites you to come home to who you were before survival convinced you that you had to become someone different. I think that's one of the biggest misunderstandings about transformation. People often ask me, how do I become a different person? But that's not the goal of the reset methodology. The goal isn't becoming someone new. It's uncovering who you've been underneath the survival strategies all along. Every survival strategy served a purpose. Every adaptation tells a story, and every behavior leaves clues. The question has never been whether your behaviors make sense. The question is whether they're still leading you toward the life you want to live. That's why I don't believe healing is about fighting yourself. It's about understanding yourself. It's about becoming curious enough to ask, why did this make sense? Before you ask, how do I change? Because when understanding comes first, compassion can follow. When compassion follows, safety begins to grow. When safety grows, choice becomes possible. And choice is where transformation begins. That doesn't mean tomorrow you'll wake up and never struggle with control again. It doesn't mean that fear suddenly disappears. It doesn't mean forgiveness becomes effortless. Healing rarely happens at dramatic moments. More often, it's in ordinary ones. It happens the next time you feel yourself tightening your grip. And instead of judging yourself, you become curious. It happens the next time you recognize an old survival strategy and quietly remind yourself, that helped me once, but it may not be what I need today. It happens every time you choose truth over protection. One moment, one decision, one conversation at a time. It's how lives change. Not through perfection, through practice. Maybe that's what I hope you carry with you more than anything else today. You don't have to figure out the rest of your life this week. You don't have to heal every wound. You don't have to release every burden all at once. You only need enough courage to investigate the next clue, because that's how transformation happens. Not in one giant leap, but one honest question at a time. Before you leave today, I'd love to send you home with 4 things. The first is this week's investigation. What am I afraid will happen if I finally let go? Don't rush the answer. Just notice what comes up. Sometimes the answers we need aren't found by thinking harder. Sometimes they're found by listening more honestly. The second is this week's practice. Pay attention to the moments when you feel yourself tightening your grip. Before you react, pause. Take a breath. And then ask yourself, what am I trying to protect? Not what am I trying to control? That one small shift may tell you more than you realize. The third is this week's resource. If today's conversation resonated with you, I encourage you to spend some time with my book, The Lie is Loud, where I share more of my own journey of investigating the stories I believed about myself and how those stories shape my behaviors. If you've already read it, maybe revisit the chapter that impacted you the most. Sometimes we hear something completely different the second time because we've changed. And finally, I'd love to hear from you. One of the greatest gifts of doing this work isn't standing behind a microphone. It's hearing what people discover after the conversation is over. If today's investigation gave you a breakthrough, if it helps you understand yourself differently, or even if it simply left you with a question you're still wrestling with, I'd love to know. Send me an email at hello@monicaazulay@gmail.com. Send me a direct message on social media. Reply to the newsletter. Tell me what you're discovering. Because every time someone shares their story, someone else realizes that they're not alone. I've learned that stories create permission. Every time I choose to share part of my story, my hope is that it gives someone else permission to investigate their own. And every time you choose to share what you've discovered, you extend that invitation to someone you've never even met. That's how community grows. One conversation, one discovery, one story at a time. If today's conversation encouraged you, I'd love to invite you to join me in an upcoming Reset Masterclass. Thank you for coming in today. Until next week, stay curious, tell yourself the truth with compassion, and remember, behavior isn't random. Behavior is evidence, and behavior leaves clues. I'm Monica Azoulay, and I'll see you next week.